I didn't know how badly I was affected or damaged. I was still going through undiagnosed PTSD, and I did that for almost 30 years. I just thought that post traumatic stress disorder was for Army veterans or people that had done really dangerous stuff. And in hindsight, when I look at my background, I realized that I'd absolutely done some really dangerous stuff. But I'd gone through years of emotional distance and joylessness, and all of what I know now are classic symptoms of post traumatic stress disorder. And my daughters had grown up with me like that. And I was never violent. I came from a background of domestic abuse. Would never be violent to my partner or my children. Quite the opposite. Um, but I wanted to give them some stories to potentially help them understand why I was like that. They knew my background. They knew I'd been a policeman for 20 years, but they didn't really know much detail. And although I had my bravery medal and valor medal citations on the wall that give a bit of a snapshot of what you do, um, I just wanted to give them more in-depth stories, I guess. So I started writing. The first chapter I wrote was about a siege I went to in 1992, so well into my career. And I wrote that, and then I gave it to my eldest daughter and gave it to a neighbor and gave it to one of the people that I trained with in my karate dojo. And my daughter loved it. My next door neighbor went, "Wow." And my my buddy to my karate dojo said, "That was awesome. Where's more? I want more. I want more." And so I thought, okay, I might have a bit of a powerful story to tell. So I just started writing, not chronologically, just as stories came back to me. And that process went on for maybe, I don't know, a year or so. And I was out in a pub one night and just chatting with some people, as I do, because I'm a pretty sociable guy. And the question was, "What have you done in your life?" I went, "Well, I did this. I used to be an undercover cop," and then of course they said, "Oh, tell us some stories." So as I'm just chatting away, one of them said, "You should write a book," and I said, "Well, yeah, I've written some things. If I really knew what I was doing, maybe find a ghostwriter or a co-author. I'd love to." And he said, "Well, my mate here is doing a creative arts PhD or creative writing PhD." And so we went hello, and he said, "Mate, I'd love to help you do it." So off and on, I don't know, maybe the next 3 years it took to, because Ben lived in Adelaide, which is another state in Australia. So we'd chat on the phone. I'd write things. I'd send them to him. He'd tidy them up, edit them, make some suggestions. So it went back and forth. I have to say though that we did have some disagreements. He wanted to put a creative fiction component into my writing, and I went, no, 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 this has got to be raw and real. And I never intended it or imagined it would be published. So I wanted to have a manuscript that I could give to my family and friends. Maybe in my wildest dreams, print off a couple of hundred copies and give them to people. So I wanted it to be accurate, and I wanted it to be raw and defining of those days. So yeah, we had some disagreements over it, but at any rate, um, that's the succinct version. And then it was all finished, and I went, wow. So I got into a closed Facebook group, and I'm still a little uncomfortable talking about my medals, but I'm decorated for bravery and whatever. And so as a result, I was asked to join a bravery association in Australia, and the association exists to support people emotionally and mentally through trauma they experience when they get medals for doing brave stuff. So anyway, I was in this association, and I just put a little message out to go, "Hey guys, I've written a manuscript about my journey, my struggles, and so on for the first 10 years. Anyone keen to read it?" And probably within, I have to say, half an hour, another member came back and she said, "Well, I've actually been published twice, and if you send me a couple of chapters and a synopsis, I'll do more than read it. I will send it off to contacts I have in the publishing world." And I went, wow, okay. And that I'm a very open person, Dawn. And in the message, he said, and send me a synopsis. And I went, sure. So then I had to Google what a synopsis was. So I did a synopsis and sent the chapters off, and she sent them to two publishers after she'd read them. And I think it was maybe two of the or three of the chapters I thought were the best ones. And I had written another 20,000 words on top of the first book. Part of that obviously turned up, or another version of it turned up in my second book. But so I got the best chapters, and within I guess 3 days or so, her contact from Allen and Unwin, which is the biggest publishing house in Australia, came back and said, I love what I see. I need to speak to you. Send me the rest of the manuscript. And then lo and behold, within, I think, maybe 2 weeks, I had a contract.
My God.
Which just blew me away. It still does.
That's amazing.
I find it just amazing that say the Writers' Festival, I'm able to spend time with authors, because I still don't regard myself as an author, but apparently I am one. I'm just a guy who wrote some stuff down, and it's just, I'm forever humbled by the amount of people who've bought my books and read them, and have come back to me and given me great feedback, like yourself. And it's still very surreal to me, and I never want to lose that. I never want to lose that feeling of gratefulness. I do see other people who have some success in this field who become a little full of themselves, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And as my lovely wife Jennifer says to everybody who says, "Oh my God, Keith's written 2 books, wow, wow, wow," she goes, "Well, he still has to take out the rubbish bins."
See, she'll keep you humble.
Oh, yes, she does.
Did it help you? You said that you were suffering, obviously, for a long time.
Yeah, it did. It certainly did. And the fact that the first one was published and so well received empowered me emotionally to sit and then write the second. And in between the time that I'd finished the first, it was published in 2020, I think. 2020. So in 2019, I was still working in the corporate world then. And I'd sort of almost finished the manuscript. I was working on it. I was working on it in my office when I had nothing else to do. And about 2019, I was in a meeting in the city with a government body. I was the chief operations officer of a membership association, and so we were meeting people in the training sphere, etc. And I was sitting beside this younger guy who just had something about him. I just had a sense this guy was much more than a public servant or a civil servant. So I said, "What's your background?" And he said, "Yeah, I was in the army." I said, "Okay, and I have a great affection for the army or the ADF, sorry, the Australian Defence Force in particular." And I said, "Oh, so what regiment, what battalion, where'd you serve?" And he said, "I was in the SAS." I went, "Okay, I knew some people from the SAS a long time ago. Did you see service overseas?" He said, "Yeah, I was deployed 3 times, I think." And as I do with every veteran, I said, "So how are you? How are you feeling?" He said, "I have some bad days. Not too bad anymore, but some bad days." And as he was chatting with me, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, and he handed it to me. And I said, "And this is who I talked to, and I think you should give her a call." And I went, "Wow, does it show that much?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, for sure." Which is still a little emotional to talk about. It was clear that I was suffering so badly but I had believed I was hiding it from the world. So I made an appointment with his psychiatrist, and I'd been to a number of counsellors over the years, and I just couldn't find one that suited me. I couldn't find one I was comfortable with. When I speak to corporations and organisations now about mental health, mental fitness and resilience and recovery, and I liken it to speed dating. You sit in front of someone, you chat for 2 minutes, not for me, not for me, not for me, and you might finally go, aha. That was my journey of finding the right psychiatrist. Well, she was the first psychiatrist I spoke to. But within an hour, after I'd unburdened myself and not realizing I was actually doing it, I don't know how they do it. They're like magicians. Um, and I just, my coping mechanism has always been humor. So I just said, "So, Doc, what do you think?" And she looked at me and said, "Keith, I'll never forget it." She said, "You have chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. You have anxiety. You likely have depression, and your resilience is amazing." Because she said many other people would have crumpled into a heap by now. And then she looked at me and said, "So, what do you think about that?" And I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds, maybe 15 seconds. And I won't use the language that I use, but I said, "That makes me feel amazing." And, and she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I now know that I haven't been imagining it or exaggerating it or inventing it. And now that I know that what I have, now's the opportunity for me to go, right, I'm going to move forward and do something about it." And again, this sounds very um, self-opinionated or whatever, but she said that is an amazing attitude to have. And that was really the breakthrough for me. She gave me coping mechanisms. I did a lot of research, a lot of self-examination, a lot of changing of my internal dialogue, which I think is very important. And then I started writing the second book. So 2021, 2 years later, I felt I was in a better emotional position to write what is a very tough book, and relive some of those moments and pay homage to people who've been killed along the way, which I think is very, very important. And so that second one was incredibly cathartic. The first one was probably more fun, just talking about all the naughty stuff that, although there were some stories about near-death misses, as you know. But the second one was just, it was, I think it's better. I think it's better. And it was just an outpouring of emotion on those pages that, when it was being edited, the chief editorial director of Allen and Unwin decided she wanted to edit it herself, which is a huge compliment. And her comments when she was editing were, "Oh my God, this made me cry," etc. And then I just thought, man, well, I've got some powerful stuff to tell. So hopefully this one will get published as well. And I was fortunate enough that it did.
Like you said, I think you used a lot of humor in the first one. It wasn't as deep, but the second one, it hits you.
Yeah,
It really gets you. I noticed the difference between the two as well,
yeah, yeah,
and really powerful.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it is that, and that's what happened. And as one of the authors who was presenting the festival said, you shouldn't have a favourite child, and you shouldn't have a favourite book, but every one of us does. That's my favourite book.
I think they're both really interesting, but yeah, that one was a
Thank
lot more
you.
emotional. How was it writing that then, reliving all these things that had really affected
Um,
you?
yeah, the chapter where I've written about my friend being murdered in a gunfight. That was the last one I wrote. That was the toughest one to write. So it took me a while, to get all that out, and then to go back and edit it again. And I wanted the memory of Peter to be appropriate. Yeah, that was tough. That took me a while, and a few tears, and a lot of introspection, and yeah, memories, both good and bad. But certainly, I wanted to express the impact of that morning as much as I could. Um, and the paradox of that is that when I finished writing it and I sort of hit that last full stop, I immediately felt like a weight had gone, from my shoulders, and a weight had gone from my heart, um, because it was finally on paper. It was finally, and I was pretty confident it was going to be published. And I just thought, wow, there's going to be these people that I'll never meet in person who are going to read that story. Yeah. And so I'm really, really, really glad I did it.
you've carried a lot of guilt with you for such a long time as well
Indeed.
about that operation.
Yeah.
Because years later, you met somebody who said that you were their hero. That must have been so nice to hear.
Yeah, it was. And Scotty and I are still very, very good friends.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that was nice.
Yeah, it was. Just, having affirmation after so many years of trauma. And again, one of my realizations about post-traumatic stress disorder is there are many incarnations of it. Mine was survivor guilt plus, the trauma of losing a mate, and all that goes with that. And to have affirmation from someone who was, 20 years younger, and in a field that I had worked in that was much more professional, and not just from him, from his colleagues, was just incredibly empowering. Is a word that's used so much, but I can't think of another one. I literally woke up after that conversation the next morning, and wow, it was just like I was able to fly again after carrying so much self-imposed guilt for so long. And I really feel for people who struggle with that. It's a horrible place to be.
And you watched that a lot as well with your friends, your undercover friends, and you watched that as you got out of it and they were still in it.
Yeah.
That must have been hard to watch as well. There's nothing you can do.
Yeah, well, we didn't talk to each other openly in those days about mental health. Alpha males and alpha females, and I make no gender distinction, don't do it. And in a world of policing, and I don't know about Scotland. I don't think your police are armed as a matter of course over there, but over here we are. And working in a field, carrying a firearm every day, sometimes having to use it, seeing the emotional, the terrible physical and traumatic things that happen to people, that people can do to each other, and seeing that part of the world has a major impact, because cops are still human beings. And particularly in those days of the 80s and 90s, there was no psychological support in place. It started to happen really maybe in 1993 or 94 in Brisbane or in Queensland, around the same time in the other states. But no one, it's hard to explain the mentality of police. Those alpha personalities won't ever talk to someone that they perceive has only seen life through a textbook. So even though it's there, the attitude is, what the hell would you know? You've never seen it. Yeah. So there's a real wall between operational police and psychologists and support networks, or there was. And at the same time, we didn't talk to each other because we didn't want each other to think that we were weak. Terrible, terrible thing to do in hindsight. But that's when you live in a culture of operational policing. It's also a personal safeguard, because you don't want to admit to yourself that you're being affected as badly by what you're seeing and doing. And I talk a lot about that, overcoming that internal narrative that says you're weak if you talk about the fact that you have a mental distress, because it's not the case at all. It's actually brave to speak about it.
Yeah, it's just a different mindset now.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah.
Tell me about your childhood.
Yeah, my childhood was tough, and so for those listeners who've not read the books, and I hope they do, and there's a shameless marketing plug right there. Although I have to openly say, authors don't get paid very much out of what they sell. 8 to 10% of retail price is all that we make, and that's just the nature of the business. But yeah, my mother and my natural father divorced when I was a baby. I didn't remember him at all, and then I suspect the divorce was quite acrimonious because she moved me back to Queensland. So so she moved me to a little town, a little 300-person town where her parents lived. And for that first 6 years of my life, I was surrounded by family, uncles, grandparents, and it was as loving as every family should be, but often aren't. And she remarried when I was about maybe a little younger than 6, but she remarried a man who was charming on the outside, but had a real problem with alcohol, and had a real problem with me. And, all of these years later, I've analysed his anger, and I am very firmly convinced it was because I was the product of another marriage, and he had an insane amount of jealousy about that. He was an unskilled worker, so we moved from town to town after they married. I can't remember how many schools I went to in the first 3 years of my school life, but it certainly was well over 10. My mother finally had the courage to put her foot down and tell him that I needed some stability. So I lived with my grandparents again, I think from years 3, 4, and 5 in primary school, or maybe 2, 3, and 4, something like that. And I'm pretty sure he was happy to be rid of me. So they had another 2 daughters. We moved from there to a mining town in Queensland. We moved to the Northern Territory. We moved to Cairns, where I've just been, for the Writers' Festival, which I loved. And then to a little place called Charters Towers back in the country. So that, the time from I was 6, I was in a constant state of hypervigilance. I would be hit for things that I have no idea what were, punishable. He was just not a very pleasant man. He would drink, he would assault my mother, he'd assault me. So I spent that, it was about 10 years, I think, in that domestic situation. And I knew that I was bright academically, although he told me otherwise. It's just psychological, just horrible. I think we've given him enough airtime. And I knew my means of escape were to do well in school. I told myself from the time I was maybe 8 years old, where I could understand the concept. This is not forever. This is not going to be forever. So it is what it is. You become resilient, I think, when you aren't broken, or when you are broken, but then you have the ability to stand up and move on again. That builds resilience. And it sounds like a very horrible way to describe it, but the more you suffer, the more resilient you become. And the year I turned 17, I was accepted into the police academy as a cadet. And the cadet system in those days was, you could go there and complete your years 11 and 12, which is our last year of high school, and then move into the workforce. So I couldn't stay for another year after that, and I applied. I needed my parents' permission. As far as I was concerned, he wasn't a parent. So my mother gave me permission. He was absolutely against it. He thought all coppers were bad and blah, 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 which even generated even more desire in me to move and become one. But I wanted to join something where I could protect people from predators and bullies, and it doesn't take a psychologist to figure out why. I still term it as I escaped. I was accepted into the academy and escaped. I loved it.
Did you, Keith? See, reading that book, I was thinking, God, you left one bad situation and then you met Sergeant Tom Malloy, and I was like, oh no. And you loved it.
Yeah, but Tom wasn't a bully. He scared me. He scared me immensely. Scared all of us. He was a classic drill sergeant, and I didn't understand that for quite a while. He was just a fearsome individual. He was Irish. He'd been in the Royal Navy. He'd been sunk twice in World War II. He was this huge, incredibly loud, terrifying figure. But in hindsight, what he was doing that as every military establishment does, and policing establishment in those days, to really weed out those who are genuine and those who are only there because they sort of think it's a good idea at the time. But I loved it, Dawn, because I had my own room. I hadn't grown up with my own bedroom ever. I was paid, so I was able, and I was never allowed to listen to any of my own music in my home, and And it sounds all sad, and it was, it was, but it also, it's the classic Nietzsche, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, which is the concept of resilience and stoicism as well. So I just went there and went, hey, I'm getting paid. I have my own room. I'm getting fed well. Yeah, I'm getting screamed at and yelled at, but what an opportunity. And and even though I was bullied by, and I've written about being bullied by a certain individual who bullied a lot of younger and smaller cadets, that stuff happens everywhere again, But I was used to it. I said, oh well, I've come from that sort of background. Yeah, I've only got this for a couple of years. It won't be forever. So I was probably fortunate that I'd been through that childhood, um, those childhood challenges, because that empowered me to put up with the challenges in an academy situation as well.
I didn't like reading that. I was coming along the journey with you, and I was like, "I'll give him a break.
Yeah,
Give him a break." Not Tom Malloy, but the bully, and for nothing as well,
yeah,
just because you
yeah.
said something to his face.
Well, I ran into him a couple of years ago when I was traveling.
Really?
Mm. And I was with my CEO at the time, and I told my CEO and I got on fabulously, and I told him pretty much my whole life story, and I told him about that incident, and I was back in Brisbane, having a beer with a few of my friends who are either still police or have left the police force, and all good people. And someone mentioned he was in the bar next door, and I went, really? I might go and say hello. And and I have, I've changed a lot since those days. And so as I strolled off, my boss said to my friends, "Uh-oh, I think this might not go well." And but no, I went in. I told him what I thought of him. I told him what other people thought of him. He was with a couple of football players, so rugby league players. He still hangs around in that network. And and I said, so I just want to let you know this is what I think. This is what you did. What a human being you are. And one of these other guys asked, what's going on here? So I just said, oh well, quick summary of what had happened. And then this person said, oh, I wouldn't do it now because apparently he's a bit of a fighter. And I said, no, you wouldn't do it now. It wouldn't end very well for you. And with that, again, that gave me an opportunity to get stuff off my chest. And I bought him a drink and moved back. And when I walked back into the other bar, everyone was watching because, they thought I may have wreaked some vengeance. But had it been 20 years ago, probably would have. But nowadays, no, there's no point. I think you can achieve more by just telling someone that they should have some self-reflection on their personality and the impact they've had on others. So that was okay.
And how did he
So,
take it?
oh, he took it fairly well actually, and he apologised, and so that was nice closure. Long time ago, but nice closure.
God, good for you.
Thank you.
So you get through the academy, not really unscathed, but you get through it. But then you can't get sworn in because you're not 19 yet. Is that right? So what
Yeah.
happens in between that time?
Yeah, our swearing in age was 19, so then I had to spend 5 months doing admin work and driving bosses around and whatever as a graduate cadet. And so, yep, I must have had some sort of, must have broken 14 mirrors or something, because with my luck again, part of my graduate cadet time was to spend time in a suburban police station with the commissioned officer or the man in charge, who was a complete bastard. So, and I laugh about it now, but it was just, I thought, God, I've left the academy after being yelled at. Now I'm putting up with this clown. When is this going to stop? Um, but then what I learned from that was how not to manage people, and that's what I've tried to adopt all my life. Is take the good and mimic the good that you see, and just blow away the bad. In other words, don't repeat those behaviours. But at the time, it was, oh God, Jesus, 5 months is a long time when you're 18 and a half. So then I was sworn in as a fully fledged police officer. And at the swearing in parade at the academy, that's when I saw the true side of Tom Malloy. The sergeant had terrified me for 2 years. And he was shaking all our hands, and I said, "Thank you, Sarge." And he said, "The name's Tom, son." And that blew my mind because, he was this almost demigod. And he looked at me and said, and it would have seen this with thousands of police recruits he's put through, that look of amazement. And that's when he said, "Well, if you couldn't handle me," in this beautiful Irish brogue, "son, if you couldn't handle my shit, how are you going to handle what you see on the streets?" And I went, aha, that's what he was doing. And then I saw him over the years subsequent to that. And so I'd go to the academy, and part of my career when I was training special weapons or firearms or out there on training courses or whatever. And I always went up and had a chat and had a cup of tea or, with him. And he was a brilliant guy. Really, really, really good guy.
I was surprised that your stepdad turned up for that as well.
Yeah, that swearing in was interesting. And I think, again, he was such a narcissistic personality that he would have felt he had to be there, to be seen to be there, but also then be able to brag to his friends that his stepson was a cop. Who the hell knows what he was thinking? Or it could well have been that, he just thought if he didn't take my mother along, then his life would be difficult, because I think she was starting to, after all those years, stand up to him with the domestic abuse, and verbally fight back a bit. God knows, I never bothered to ask him.
Did you stay in touch with your mum over the years?
Oh yeah, yeah, oh absolutely, yeah. I spent a lot of my vacation time driving up to where they lived and spending time with her and my sisters for sure. She was taken in a road accident in 2013.
Oh,
It's very
no.
sad.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Keith. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's been a few challenges when you add them up, I guess.
And what about your sisters? Are you still in touch with?
Yeah, yeah. One lives in Charters Towers near in the same town we grew up, and the other lives in the Northern Territory.
Are you in Melbourne? Is that where you
Live in
are?
Melbourne, yeah, in Victoria. I moved here a year after I left the police force. That's what they did in those days. They'd sometimes drag fresh-faced kids out of the academy and throw them into the undercover world. The husband produced a pump-action shotgun and put it in my face, and I thought, well, that was a short-lived career. Had I not been an undercover cop, I would have treated him probably the same as the others did. Whereas I became quite close to him. If you weren't careful in those days and you said no to something like this, you could well find that there would be illicit drugs planted in your house or stolen property planted in your house somewhere,